Alright, ladies and gentlemen, last video. We're going to talk about the function of skin and how does our skin repair itself after injury. So at this point, having covered all of the anatomy and structures of the skin, we should be able to piece together a few of the functions. Protection is a big one. Protection against bacteria, UV rays, trauma, chemicals. The skin is also responsible for cooling, with millions of sweat glands helping us keep our body temperature in normal range. We have an excessive amount of blood flow to the skin for that reason. If we're too warm, blood vessels will dilate and more blood will go to the skin, so we lose more heat, which cools us down. If we get too hot, the opposite happens. We constrict those vessels, pull the blood back inside, and retain heat. On top of that, we can use our body to excrete some excess chemicals that we have in our skin, in our body through our skin. Uric acid, ammonia, and excess urea are all chemicals that we can sweat out. Finally, the skin is involved in synthesizing vitamin D directly from sunlight. This is really important as vitamin D plays a crucial role in taking calcium in and out of the bones, and it has lifelong impacts to the health and mobility as we age. So skin is really important, so it's important that we protect it. Things like infection, cuts, and burns all ruin the skin's ability to complete these functions. If our skin gets damaged, say from a cut, the first thing that happens is the body will form a blood clot to stop the bleeding. Next, cells in the stratum basilae will create thick fibers to close the wound. These thickened fibers are what we call a scar. Depending on the thickness and the size of the injury, sometimes the scar's tissue is so small we hardly notice it, or disappears altogether. More often in larger injuries, that scar tissue can still be visible. Scar tissue has no sweat glands, no blood vessels, and no receptor sites, so it's unable to perform the functions that normal skin can. Sometimes when the healing process gets out of control or scar tissue develops incorrectly, it can develop into what's called a keloid. So when we look at burns specifically, they have a huge impact on the function of skin, depending on the depth of the burn. Burns have been classified in a few ways. The current standard is superficial, partial thickness, and full thickness, with superficial being just the epidermis, partial thickness being the dermis, and then full thickness being everything below the dermis, or getting into the layers below the dermis. So fatty layers, and that subcutaneous layer, muscles, and even the bones can be burned. Burned tissue, just like scar tissue, cannot regulate heat, you can't sweat, you can't produce vitamin D, and it offers very little protection. This is why one of the biggest complications of a burn is an infection.